Well, good morning, Doxology. Thanks for joining us this morning. It's great to worship with you today, even from a distance. And as always, I am so honored to get to join you in your living room or on your porch or in your office, wherever you're joining us today. It is so good to be with you, even while I look forward to the day when I can look you in the eye. Again, hopefully that's coming real soon. Hey, if you got a Bible this morning, go ahead and start making your way to 1 Kings chapter 3. 1 Kings 3 is where we're going to be today for part 2 of a series where we've been looking at the life of a guy named Solomon, who we said last week is a guy who, in a lot of ways, had everything many of us dream of and ended up with very little of everything we hope for. He got a whole lot of things really right over the course of his life and his leadership, and a few big things really wrong. So we're looking at his story, hoping we can learn from both. Last week we looked at where things started to go wrong for Solomon, really from the very beginning. This week, I want to talk about one of the things that Solomon got right from the very beginning. You know, there's an ancient Chinese proverb that you probably know. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with, that's right, a single step. And that's true, isn't it? You can't cross the finish line if you don't leave the starting blocks. But as true as that proverb is, I think it's missing a really important detail. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step in the right direction. See, the truth is, a first step in the wrong direction can leave you, after 1,000 miles of walking, 2,000 miles from where you were hoping to go. So here's the question I want to ask you this morning. If you've got a God-sized dream for your life, or if you believe that maybe God Himself had a God-sized reason for creating someone called you on the earth, what's the right first step towards that dream? Or maybe to say it another way, the real estate mogul Gary Keller wrote a book several years ago called The One Thing, where he challenges you to boil the thousands of decisions that you and I have to make every day, the relationships that we have to manage from family to work to school to sports to church to neighbors to so on. What if we could distill all of that down? The decisions, the relationship, and the information that's flying at us, that's available to us from every direction. In fact, I read a book this week that said that as of this year, there are 40 times more bytes of data on the internet than there are stars in the observable universe. That by the year 2025, 463 exabytes of data will be created online every day. And just to put that in perspective, 5 exabytes of data is equivalent to all of the words ever spoken by humans since the dawn of time. Okay, in the next 5 years, that amount of data will be created online every 15 minutes. No wonder we're exhausted. What if we could boil all of that, the decisions, the relationships, the information, down to one question? Here's Keller's. What's the one thing that you could do that by doing it would make every other thing easier or unnecessary? Is there one domino that you could push that would knock down all or most of the others? So for example, for Michael Phelps, his one thing from a young age was a commitment to get in the pool every single day, no matter what. On days he felt like it, and days he didn't. Even if he just put on his trunks and his goggles and got in and then got back out, he was getting in the pool every day. Because he realized he wasn't just going to do that. Like once you're in the pool, you might as well swim a lap. And then after a lap, might as well swim another, and then another. And all of the other decisions got easier or unnecessary after he made just that one decision. Okay, you may have seen the commencement speech at UT or read the book by Admiral William McRaven. He declared, if you want to change the world, remember what he said? Start by making your bed. You accomplish the first task of the day, which gives you a momentum for the next task and the next task. Okay, here's where Solomon's story takes us today. I think the same thing's true when it comes to the God-sized dream you have for your life and that God, your Heavenly Father, has for your life. And in fact, Solomon is faced with that question in the form of an offer from God. Look at it. 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 5. It says, at Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon during the night in a dream. And God said, ask for whatever you want me to give you. God tells Solomon, I'm going to say yes to your very next prayer. So make it a good one. What one thing do you want? You may know how the story goes. Solomon doesn't pray for what I would have prayed for. I would have prayed for 3 more prayers. And then I would have used one of them to pray that the people that I love wouldn't ever suffer. I would have used one of them to pray for the next Powerball numbers. And I would use the third one to pray for 3 more prayers. Solomon takes a different tack, and it turns out to be an infinitely better request. And I want to show you what it is, because I am totally convinced that if his one thing was our one thing, it would make our lives better. And it would make us better at life. And not just us, the people who lean on us and who look to us, it would make their lives better too. Can I show you what it is? Okay, well, actually keep reading. Before Solomon asks it, he gives us the logic behind why he asks it. And it is solid gold logic. Look what he says, beginning in verse 6. Solomon answered, you have shown great kindness to your servant, my father David, because he was faithful to you and righteous and upright in heart. You've continued this great kindness to him and have given him a son to sit on his throne this very day. So notice what Solomon says. He says, I believe my life has purpose and promise despite the mess in my family story. I believe, God, you've got a purpose for me and a plan for me that's a whole lot bigger than me. In fact, keep reading. Look at the humility here, starting in verse 7. He says, now, Lord my God, you've made your servant king in place of my father David. But I'm only a little child. I don't know how to carry out my duties. He's not literally a little child at this point. He's a grown man at this point. But he's saying the decisions, the information, the responsibility, like I am way out of my depth here. And the people that are looking to me and leaning on me and counting on me, look at verse 8. Your servant is here among the people you've chosen, a great people, too numerous to count or number. So what does Solomon ask for? Well, maybe you've heard Solomon's story before, and you know he asks for wisdom. And that is what he asks for. And just in case you haven't been around Doxology for long, or on the weeks when we've talked about wisdom, you haven't been here, let me just remind you really quickly what wisdom is. Okay, wisdom is a God's eye perspective for navigating real life in real time. It's the ability to see the 35,000 decisions that we'll make today, all of the relationship circles that we've got to navigate today, and all of the exabytes of information at my fingertips with a God's eye perspective, so that I know what to do, or what to say, or how to help, what to believe about everything I'm dealing with in real life, in real time. That's wisdom. And it is what Solomon asks for. But actually, the word wisdom doesn't show up in his request. He asks for it. It's the one thing he believes will simplify his decisions and his relationships and his leadership. But he asks for that one thing to show up in 2 ways that I think are really helpful. So look at the next verse, 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 9. He says, so, with all of that I've just said, so give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong. Okay, the translation of this verse to English smooths this out for us here, which is good. But in asking for wisdom, one thing, Solomon asks for a heart that's able to do 2 distinct things. And I want to talk to them both. The first thing he asks for, you see it here, is a discerning heart. Literally, a heart that listens. A heart that listens. Okay, pop quiz, real quick. If you got access to the chat, you can put your answer there, or if you're watching with family, go ahead and say it out loud. Okay, you ready? Here's the question, pop quiz. A heart that listens to whom? You got it? Okay, answers in the chat or out loud, wherever you're at. What's the answer? Some of you think it's God? Okay, just guessing. I can't see the chat or listen into your living room, but this is church, so I'm assuming that's the answer that a few people gave. It's God, okay? Any of you think it's maybe somebody else? Maybe the people around Solomon, or a heart that listens to the people he's responsible for, maybe? Okay, a few of you. Okay, pencils down. Who's right? I think the verse implies both. Look what it says. It says in 3:9, so give your servant a discerning heart, listening heart, to govern your people. See, Solomon's not just thinking about becoming a monk or a hermit, moving away to a desert island, away from the problems of people and decisions and responsibilities of the day where he could just do nothing but sit on a rock and listen to God. That's not the idea. Solomon's asking to have a heart that listens to the real-time voice of God as it's hearing the real-time needs of the people in the place he's placed, the people he's responsible to, and the people that he's responsible for. So maybe think of it this way. Have you ever seen a Secret Service agent at work? Or even our police officers and some of the gatekeepers who serve around here when people are gathered together? You ever notice they've always got one earpiece in their ear, but never two? Have you ever stopped to think about why? See, they need to have their ear on command and dispatch. Their ear on somebody who sees what they can't see. Somebody who knows what they can't know, who has perspective that they don't have. And they have to have an ear on the real world around them in real time. And they're never confused about where their allegiance lies or where their responsibility lies. They have to stay dialed in and listening to command and to be ready to move anytime, anywhere to do anything that command commands, as soon as command commands it. But they have to have an ear on the world around them that keeps them aware and keeps them alert so they're ready to respond wisely and immediately to whatever the situation calls for as soon as command speaks. That's what Solomon asks for right here. He wants to have a discerning heart, a heart that listens to the real world around him in real time while he's listening to and listening for God to direct him as God leads him wherever he goes. Okay, now think about this. Is that important for a king? What about a boss? What about a parent or a spouse or a neighbor or a friend or a roommate? Imagine having the kind of person in your life who had a heart that actually listened to you, more than just using the time you're talking to be thinking about what they want to say next. But not just that, who also has a heart that's listening to God in real time, alert, aware of His perspective and His purpose and His wisdom and His direction for both of you in real time. Wouldn't having someone like that in your life make your life better and maybe even make you better at life? Okay, what if you were that kind of person? What if you were the kind of boss or parent or spouse or neighbor or friend or roommate or coworker to the people who lean on you, the people who look up to you? See, most of us tend to be one or the other, if we're either one at all, right? Like we listen to God, we listen to what He says, we have no idea how it applies to the real world because frankly, we're not listening to the real world. Or some of us are really great at listening to the world around us, like almost hyper aware of the hurts in the world around us, or the hopes or the dreams or the fears or the brokenness of individual people around us, or even sometimes as society as a whole. But we are totally disconnected from God's perspective on any of it because, frankly, we're not listening for Him in real time. Sometimes unintentionally, and sometimes because we just don't want to hear what He's saying. Okay, how would it change your decisions? Or your relationships, or your leadership, or your parenting, or your neighborhood, or your campus, if you were the kind of person who navigated real-time relationships with a heart that listened in real time, genuinely listening to the stories and the hurts and the hopes and the dreams of the people that God placed in your life, not just as a good behavior, but out of your heart's posture. While, even as you're listening to your world in real time, you have an ear that's tuned in to command and dispatch, that's aware and alert for what God has spoken and what He wants to say in real life, in real time. A heart that listens. It's the first way that Solomon expects wisdom to reveal itself in his everyday life. But look back at the verse. There's a second piece. Verse 9 again. He says, so give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong. Here's what Solomon's after here. I gave you my definition for wisdom earlier. Here's what Tim Keller says that wisdom is. He says, wisdom is knowing how to navigate the realities of life when the rules don't help. Okay, it's not just the ability to tell between good and bad on the things that are black and white. Like, should I cheat on my spouse, or spend more money than I make, or should I lie on my taxes, or should I drink underage, should I sleep with my boyfriend or girlfriend, or whatever. Like, you don't need wisdom for that, right? You may need courage or obedience for that, but you don't need wisdom. The thing is, those kinds of decisions aren't the majority of the 35,000 decisions we make every day. And, not always, but usually, those aren't the toughest decisions we make. It's questions like who to marry, where to go to school, what to study, whether or not to take a job or quit a job or invest in an idea or buy or sell our business, whether to get a vaccine or require a mask, or to draw a line on the sand on a political issue, when to break up or make up or speak up in a relationship. Those are the decisions that keep us up at night when it's complicated and complex, and the infinite information at your fingertips don't help make anything clearer, and you don't know what to do. Because here's what all of us know. Solomon knew as well. You can make a decision that's not wrong and is still a terrible decision. We've done it. We've watched our kids do it. We watched our bosses do it, and our neighbors do it, and our friends do it, and our politicians do it, and we don't want to do it. We don't want to do it again. Solomon says, God, I want a heart that listens, a discerning heart, and I want a distinguishing heart. I want to be able to move forward with conviction and clarity in the middle of complexity. Solomon actually gets to do this later on in the chapter, starting in verse 16. It's a really famous story. Two women come to him and say, both of us just had babies. One of us rolled over on our baby and it died. One of them says, it was her, and she came to my bed and stole my baby in the middle of the night. The other one says, I absolutely did not, but you're trying to steal my baby in broad daylight by saying that I did. And all of the eyes go to Solomon, leaning on him, looking on him to make the decision. And it's complex. And he's got to lead with conviction and clarity because the stakes are high. A child's life's at stake. You probably know how the story goes. He makes an incredibly wise decision that reveals the truth. Because Solomon's heart was paying close attention to their stories, to their needs. And he was tuned into what God was saying and nudging and leading. And as a result, he was able to lead with conviction and clarity during an extraordinarily complex situation in real time, in the real world. And that played out over and over and over again through the rest of his life because God answered his prayer. And we talked about this before when we talked about decision making in complex situations. Like most of us have been in situations with high stakes before. Situations with our kids or at work or with a friend or a neighbor where we feel like just throwing up our hands because everything feels unclear and complicated. We've said before, our first question always has to be, what has God already said? If he's been clear in black and white, our decision isn't about what to do, it's about whether or not we trust him or ourselves more. But then after that, after we've answered the question, is it right in black and white? Then the question becomes if it's wise. And this is where a heart that listens is so important. A heart that's quick to ask him to speak in real time, that stays alert and aware of how he might be speaking, in a small whisper, through the counsel of wise, Christ-centered advisors, or maybe in some other way. But then after that, to open our hands and have a listening heart that says, Lord, I love you. I want to follow you. I want to listen to you. I want to live and lead and to walk wisely in this, but I'm still, after all of that, not sure what to do. I'm not sure I've heard your voice. And the wise people around me disagree. So God, here's what I want to do. Here's what I believe is best to do. But if there's a better way to live, or a better way to lead, or a wiser way to walk from here, I'm going to need you to make it crystal clear. And if he does, walk in conviction and with clarity that God is not a father who hides his will and then punishes you for guessing wrong. He's a God who delights in watching you dream and in walking beside you as you navigate the real world in real time with him right by your side. And Solomon says, that's it, God. That's my one thing. He doesn't ask for wealth. He doesn't ask for health. He doesn't ask for 3 more wishes. He asks for wisdom. And look what happens. Verse 10. The Lord, it says, was pleased that Solomon had asked for this. So God said to him, since you've asked for this, and not for long life or wealth for yourself, nor have asked for the death of your enemies, but for discernment in administering justice, I will do what you've asked. I will give you a wise and discerning heart, so that there will never have been anyone like you, nor will there ever be. Moreover, I will give you what you have not asked for, both wealth and honor, so that in your lifetime you will have no equal among kings. And if you walk in obedience to me and keep my decrees and commands as David your father did, I will give you a long life. Then Solomon awoke, and he realized it had been a dream. And he's going to live the dream. The one thing he asks for is wisdom. And it turns out to be the thing that makes his life better, and that makes him better at life. The people who lean on him and look to him all around him, it makes their life better as well. God answers his prayer. And he goes even further than what Solomon prayed for. Not to imply that if you prayed this prayer the right way, you're going to end up financially wealthy and married to the girl or guy of your dreams and more powerful than anyone who's ever come before you. But it is to promise you that if you'll seek this one thing that reveals itself in 2 ways, you will prosper in exactly what he's designed you to be. For Solomon, when he lived into it, he was the kind of king that enjoyed God's blessing and extended God's blessing to the people God designed him and called him to lead. Now, when he drifts away from it, his life and his leadership and his legacy, it's all going to go in the other direction. I believe it's totally the same thing for you and me. Look, I don't know what God's call or promise or dream is for your life someday. And the chances are you don't know all of it either. But you know where he's called you today. You know who he's designed you to be today. And you know where he's sending you today, at least so far today. A parent or a spouse or a roommate or a friend or a boss or an employee or a neighbor or a son or a daughter or a consumer at the restaurant you're going to after this. What if you decided to live like this afternoon? If this was the one thing that you decided to do this week, if you didn't do anything else, the one thing that you asked God to say yes to for you, to have a heart that's tuned in and turned up to the people around you and to what God wants to say both to you and through you as you listen, and to determine to have a heart that seeks conviction and clarity, to walk through a world of complexity, might you find that the one thing is the thing that's the key to making your life better and to making you better at life. And might the people in your path find themselves in the presence of a person with a heart that listens to them and that listens to him and that seeks the wise way to navigate every circumstance, even in a complex, complicated world when the stakes are incredibly high. Might you find that that one step is the first step of 1,000 miles worth of steps, but one from which you might look around even earlier than you think and realize you're living the dream. Would you bow your head with me? I wonder if you have a next step this morning. Perhaps your next step's the first step, understanding that you can't have a God's eye perspective without God in your life. And you realize you're so far away on so many things you can't make your way back. If that's you, you have to realize that before you ever took a single step toward him, God moved toward you. Despite your mess and your mess-ups, God sent Jesus to pay the ultimate penalty, and he wants to forgive you and restore you to a relationship with him. And he invites you simply to take the step of transferring the weight of your trust from you to him. And you could do that right now, right where you're at, however far away from him you feel. For others of us who have a relationship with God, maybe the next step is a Solomon step, to commit to a rhythm starting today, asking him every day, or even more often than that, for a heart that listens and lives with wise, Christ-centered clarity and conviction in a world that's filled with complexity. Or maybe it's a commit to a step of reading his word so you recognize his voice. Maybe it's to hop into a community group where you got access to wise counsel. All of those are great steps. All of those are important steps for all of us at some point. The question for you this morning is, and for me this morning, what's my next step from this point? Father, would you show us Would you guide us? Would you speak to us? And would you make us wise? Would you give us hearts that listen? Listen to the world around us, but listen for your voice to move us. And then the courage and the conviction and the clarity to follow you wherever you send us, even in a complicated, complex world. We ask it in Jesus' name. Amen.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you want to see more, check out our channel or our most recent video. Also, if you enjoyed the message today, give this video a like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any new videos.